On October 17, 1973, a group of Arab oil ministers meeting in Kuwait City made a decision that would reshape the global economy forever. They cut production. They banned shipments to the United States. And they promised to keep cutting 5% every month until Washington changed its Middle East policy. Within weeks, the price of a barrel of oil quadrupled, from $2.90 to $11.65. The most powerful country on earth ran out of gas. But beneath the gas lines and the panic, something far bigger was happening. The world's financial architecture was being rewritten in real time. And the system they built in response? We're still living inside it today. The world Nixon broke. To really understand why 1973 broke the world, you have to go back 2 years. August 1971. President Richard Nixon goes on television and makes an announcement that stuns the global financial system. The United States is no longer converting dollars into gold. For 25 years, the world had operated under the Bretton Woods system, every major currency pegged to the dollar and the dollar pegged to gold. That system gave America enormous power. It also gave America an obligation to keep the dollar strong, to keep inflation low, to keep the promise that a dollar was worth something real. Nixon broke that promise. The Vietnam War had drained the treasury. Inflation was rising. Foreign governments were redeeming their dollars for gold faster than Fort Knox could handle. So Nixon pulled the plug. The dollar would float. Its value would be decided by the market. Here's what no one talks about. When the dollar started floating, it started sinking. And oil, the single most important commodity on earth, was still priced in dollars, which meant every time the dollar lost value, oil-producing countries got paid less for the same barrel. They were watching their wealth evaporate because of decisions made in Washington. This wasn't sustainable, and the Arab world knew it. How the oil weapon was built. In 1960, 5 oil-producing countries, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and Venezuela, formed OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Their goal was simple: take back control of their own resources from the Western oil giants who had been extracting them for decades. For years, a cartel of 7 Western companies, the so-called Seven Sisters, controlled everything. They set the price. They set the production. They set the terms. Whichever countries the oil is to come from, they get whatever the companies decide to give them. By the early 1970s, that was changing. OPEC countries were demanding higher prices. They were demanding greater shares of revenue. And they were starting to realize something. They had leverage. Real leverage. The West needed oil more than OPEC needed the West. Then came 1973. On October 6, 1973, Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel. Their goal: retake the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights, territories under Israeli occupation since 1967. What happened next changed everything. President Nixon ordered an emergency airlift of weapons and supplies to Israel. Operation Nickel Grass. American planes, American weapons, American support, arriving on the battlefield in plain sight. This was exactly what Saudi King Faisal had warned against. Before the war, Faisal had made a secret pact with Egypt and Syria. If the United States intervened militarily to help Israel, the Arab oil producers would respond. They would use the oil weapon. Nixon intervened. The trigger was pulled. The decision. On October 17, 1973, the Arab oil ministers gathered in Kuwait City. The decision was swift. They announced an immediate 5% cut in oil production, with further 5% cuts every month until their political demands were met. And a total embargo on oil shipments to the United States and the Netherlands, the 2 countries most visibly supporting Israel. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned. The mechanism had been debated for years. The weapon had been forged. Now it was being deployed. The market panicked. Within days, the price of oil began its climb. From $2.90 a barrel before the embargo to over $11.65 by January 1974. A 400% increase in 4 months. If you're finding this valuable, make sure to subscribe to Epic Insight and hit the notification bell. We uncover the hidden forces and buried histories that explain the world you see today. Enforcement. The 72 hours that broke a superpower. What happened next wasn't just an economic crisis. It was a psychological one. Within weeks, gas stations across America ran dry. Drivers waited in lines that stretched 5 miles. In New York and New Jersey, authorities imposed odd-even rationing. If your license plate ended in an odd number, you could buy gas on odd-numbered days. Even numbers on even days. Half a tank maximum. Some stations posted flags. Green if they had gas, red if they didn't, yellow if they were rationing. Fights broke out. Gas station owners started carrying guns. One man in Maryland spent 4 hours driving around looking for gas and found only enough to refill the half tank he'd burned searching. In December 1973, the President of the United States went on national television and asked Americans not to put up Christmas lights. The leader of the free world was begging his citizens to conserve energy during the holidays. That's not normal. That's a superpower in distress. And it wasn't just gas. Home heating costs soared. Businesses shut down. Inflation exploded, but the economy was simultaneously contracting. A new word entered the vocabulary: stagflation. Stagnation plus inflation. The economists said it couldn't happen. It was happening. America's allies were terrified too. European nations and Japan had stockpiled some oil, but they could see the writing on the wall. They started distancing themselves from U.S. Middle East policy, not because they disagreed, but because they couldn't afford to. The embargo was splitting the Western alliance apart. The world turned upside down. Nixon and his Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, scrambled to contain the damage. They launched what became known as shuttle diplomacy, flying between capitals, negotiating separate deals with Egypt, Syria, Israel, and the Gulf states. Nixon announced Project Independence, a plan to make America energy self-sufficient within 6 years. A national speed limit of 55 miles per hour was imposed on every highway in America. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve was created. Fuel economy standards were mandated for the first time. But here's the hidden truth. The real response wasn't conservation. It was a deal. A deal that would lock the world into a financial system more powerful than Bretton Woods ever was. In 1974, Henry Kissinger traveled to Saudi Arabia. The terms of what followed have been debated ever since, but the essence is clear. Saudi Arabia agreed to price and sell its oil exclusively in U.S. dollars. In return, the United States provided military protection, weapons sales, and a commitment to support Saudi security. Every country that needed oil, and every country needed oil, now needed dollars to buy it. The dollar, which had been collapsing since Nixon abandoned gold, was suddenly backstopped by something even more powerful, the world's most essential commodity. They didn't need gold anymore. They had oil, and oil was priced in dollars. The world remade. The consequences were staggering. Saudi oil revenues jumped 40-fold in a single decade, from $655 million in 1965 to $26.7 billion by 1975. Western oil companies that had controlled Middle Eastern production for decades were nationalized. Saudi Aramco, today the most valuable company on earth, passed from American hands to Saudi hands. And the money didn't just sit in the desert. Petrodollar recycling, the process by which oil revenues were deposited in Western banks and then lent back to developing countries, created a new form of financial control. Countries that borrowed in dollars to pay for oil found themselves trapped in debt. The poverty trap was born. This wasn't just a crisis. It was a new world order. The United States traded military protection for dollar dominance. Saudi Arabia traded oil for security and wealth beyond imagination. And everyone else, every country that needed energy, was locked into a system they didn't design and couldn't escape. The embargo officially ended in March 1974, after Kissinger's negotiations produced an Egyptian-Israeli disengagement agreement. But the world it created didn't end. Every energy crisis since 1979, 1990, 2008, and 2022 traces back to the architecture built in those years. The petrodollar system that emerged from the 1973 crisis is the reason the United States can run massive trade deficits without collapsing. It's the reason oil-producing states have disproportionate geopolitical power. It's the reason the dollar is still the world's reserve currency. Remove the 1973 oil crisis from history, and the entire modern financial system doesn't exist. In 1971, the dollar was backed by gold. Nixon killed that. In 1973, the Arab world proved that oil was more powerful than any currency. And in 1974, the United States proved that the smartest move isn't to fight that power. It's to capture it. The petrodollar wasn't inevitable. It was a choice, made by a few men in closed rooms. And every time you fill up your car, every time the price of gas moves, every time a central bank adjusts interest rates, you're living inside the consequences of that choice. This is the story of the week the world changed, and the system that was built to make sure it would never change back. Make sure to subscribe to our channel, Epic Insight, and hit the notification bell. Every week, we uncover the hidden forces and buried histories that explain the world you see today. And let us know in the comments, what other hidden history should we uncover next?